Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you all for joining us this evening. We're grateful to have you here. To begin, we'll be starting with a brief dars, followed by a Q&A session. After that, we'll take a short break to make wudu, and then gather for Maghrib Jamaat prayers, followed by a social. Just a reminder, our final session will be held on Friday, May 30th at 7:30 p.m. We hope to see you all there. And with that, I'd like to invite Sheikh Abu Sumayya with a loud salawat.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم ولعنة الله دائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين من يومنا هذا إلى قيام يوم الدين أما بعد السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. So we're going to continue with our subject, which at the outset, we began, or I began with this whole question of the malaise of modernity, right? What does that mean? And in our first two sessions, we discussed some elements of that, and we're going to continue that. Malaise meaning sickness, illness, depression, sadness. Where does that come from, and why is that there? And we spoke about something that we're going to come back to again and again, which is the concept that everything has an origin. And for believers, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that origin. And it's very conceptual and abstract, but it's also very practical. And that's why we went through in our last session so many examples of what we call milestones in life. And how those milestones are celebrated or commemorated is often an indication of the role that God plays in our life. The role of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Whether it be weddings and marriages, whether it be first job, whether it be how we raise our children. And so there are a number of milestones in life, and how we celebrate and remember them and commemorate them, and the nature of what those mean to us and how we remember them, both from a Sharia standpoint and an akhlaq standpoint, is often a health checkup with regards to the role that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala plays or does not play in our life, the role that God Almighty plays in our life. And this is a fundamental question. And that's why on the slide you'll see there, God and then the universe. Right? So there's an ultimate question that comes up, which is what comes first in terms of our flow of thought? Right? That does everything flow from that singular reality? Or is that singular reality, which is God, just one part of our inventory? So is it from God and then everything else flows, or God is just somehow where? In there, somewhere, as a piece of inventory in our thought? And this all depends on one's belief. And that's why I mentioned in our session last week how we commemorate milestones and how we marry and how we live and how we raise our children and how we live at home and how we conduct ourselves at work. All of that is an indication as to whether Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a piece of inventory in our life that we kind of take notice of here and there, or whether he is the primary source of everything that gives us meaning in life. And ultimately, that's the question that the Quran addresses from beginning to end. Right? This is a fundamental question. And for modern human beings, for people of the contemporary world, it's a very facile question to a certain extent, because there is, unfortunately, this assumption, because of their own or experiences with religion, that any mention of God in any organized, structured way ultimately causes the destruction, or I wouldn't say destruction, that's a bit of a harsh word, the dissolution of our way of life. Do you see what I mean? Because there's this idea that human beings are ultimately free, are absolutely free, right? And anything that would cause a restriction in that regard would be seen as a problem in the system. Right? And this is essentially the principles of modernity. This is what it's based upon, right? And you sitting here in this place tonight, listening to me talk about this, is in itself something very strange to many people. It's very strange, these ideas, because it necessitates a kind of submission to a power or a being other than themselves, other than their own ego. And then we have a very big problem. So, for example, the Prophet says, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that among the signs of the end of time is that people will not want to have children. That they will become so selfish that they will not want to have children, either because of career, because of work, whatever it is. Why do you think that would be a sign of the end of times? Of the many things that the Prophet mentions, but this is one of them, that people will stop having children. They won't want to have children anymore. Why do you think? Why do you think that would be among the signs of Akhir Zaman? Any ideas? Yes, sister.
Like a me, I, individualistic kind of life instead of having a God-centered kind of life?
Yeah, and exactly. And the Prophet says that a time will come where children or a child will equal a burden. And this is the end of times. Imagine that. Because the trials and tribulations that come about through having children is a part of our development as human beings. It's a part of our becoming human. Those burdens, those challenges, that responsibility to care, love, and spiritually nourish another soul, bring that soul into this world. That's not a burden. For the believer, it's a calling. For a believer, that's part and parcel of who they are, of their identity as a servant of God. But for the non-believer, it's a burden. Look at how the believer looks at things versus the non-believer. Very different. The believer doesn't see it as a burden. Now, yes, nobody's saying to have 10, 20 children. That's not the point. But the point is that having children is a part and parcel of life. And did you know today, the human beings have the lowest birth rates in history? Lowest birth rates in history. And we know that this is a crisis. For example, in the province of Quebec has the lowest birth rates across the country. I think in most of the Western countries, we're down to like almost 1.5 kids per family. Why is that the case? It's simply the case because we as a society no longer have that sense of giving. We don't give of ourselves anymore. And we don't give of ourselves anymore because we live in a world in which we're told that our self-importance, our self-satisfaction, our self-happiness is of paramount importance over and above everything else. And I believe it ultimately leads to a narcissistic society. Narcissistic meaning people that only care about themselves. And we then live, as as you could see on the screen there, in a fractured world. We're no longer do we raise children or exist as families in a village. So it takes a village to raise a child and a community to sustain the moral life. Just think about that quote for a moment there. It takes a village to raise a child, but a community to sustain the moral life of that child. If someone was to ask a non-believer, what is their moral life? How do you think they would answer? What do you think? What does that even mean? What does that sentence mean to you? Tell me. If it takes a village to raise a child, it takes a community to sustain the moral life. What do you get from that? What does it mean? Yeah.
I guess it's just based on whatever community you're in, so the morals of that place that you're situated in, whether that be like a westernized morals versus other parts of the world and other countries as well. So it differs across wherever you are geographically, whereas we would interpret it through a God way, which would be
Yeah. Or there's no moral life to sustain, period. I mean, what does that exactly mean? I mean, are these just kind of general niceties like be good to your elders, or if you see somebody, in need, open the door for them, give money to the poor? I mean, these are universal human values. They're important, but in sustaining the moral life, we're talking about a moral life that has a shape, that has a structure. And that can only come from religion, I believe. In its truest way, it only comes from a religious faith that has certain set precepts, understandings, a way of life, and a structure that comes from it. And when we no longer have a community to sustain the moral life of children, or your moral life, or my moral life, then we find ourselves lost in the abyss. We're lost in this world. We don't know where to go. Right? And that's why today, loneliness and depression and the sense of total estrangement has never been higher. Because there is no community per se to sustain that moral life. People's community consists of them and their dog. Leave aside being married, just them and their pet. Now I think it's a hobby to have 2 pets. I was downtown the other day for brunch, although I work in the city, but I was a little bit outside of my office area in Liberty, King Street, and some people had 2 dogs. I saw these women walk around with 2 dogs, and they live in an apartment, like a 400, 500 square foot apartment. I don't know how You live with there. And my mom, I was with my mom, I was taking her for Mother's Day, and she said to me, that's their kids. That's replaced their family. It really has in many ways. Because one dog is not enough now, so they have 2 dogs in that apartment. It's everywhere. Honestly, if you go, that's all you see is people and dogs. Maybe they have cats in there too. I don't know. But the dogs you see outside, because they have to take them for a walk, otherwise, they're not potty trained. So there is no community to sustain that moral life. I think we've degenerated to such a point that, let me put it this way to you. And I'm glad these are not being put up, recorded later and put up online. I'm going to ask you a provocative question here. And I don't mean this to be something that is putting down of others. That's not my point. Honestly, that's not my point. When I sit in a restaurant, like a non-Muslim restaurant, whatever, I look around. I ask myself a question. What are they talking about? I can't hear them. I'm not trying to hear them. I'm just asking myself, what's the subject of their conversation? In most cases, the subject of those conversations revolve around 2 to 3 simple things. Family vacations, sports, and parties. Or gossip, 4. I remember I once was invited to my cousin's Mother's Day brunch or something. I don't know, it was a couple of years ago. They're not Muslim. And I sat there with my wife, and I realized at that point that there is no community to sustain any more life here. 0. The substance of that small talk was so disturbing to my IQ, to my soul, that after 20 minutes, the bagel was good though, it was fresh from wherever they got it from the bakery, and the cream cheese was amazing. Once I was finished with my food, there was nothing left for my soul. There was nothing. It was just vacuous. And these were multi-million-dollar professionals. The driveway, consisted of Beamers, Porsche Macans. But the conversations, maybe it's just me. Okay, a little bit here and there, you talk about different things, but not even about world issues, what's going on, this, that. It's like it was just about, I bought this house, this is the furniture that I need, this was custom, this we had to ship in, this we got in from Italy, so on and so forth. And then the other part of the conversation was about the most recent vacation, and then obviously sports. Football and basketball and on and on and on and whatever, right? Because that's basically the idols and of modernity. And that was it. And this is essentially, I would say, the top 1% of the city. So they compartmentalize when they're at work. Okay, they got to do this and this. But outside of that, it's like it's so vacuous. It's so empty. It's just it's just froth. When you order a cappuccino, you order an espresso, or not an espresso. You order a latte or cappuccino. One of the most annoying things is when 3/4 of the thing is all froth. The coffee is this much at the bottom. This was the equivalent of what the conversation was going on. And I've never been more bored, but this is the whole point, because we live in a fractured world. So despite the fact that they are the 1%, there's no doubt about that. See, they're running successful businesses, they're doctors, lawyers, whatever, right? But their children are running around, and I'm asking myself, if this is what over 1 hour, 90 minutes, 120 minutes, This is the sum of the conversation, the sum of their understanding, the sum of what's most important to them to discuss on this day. What is being imparted to kids? What is the moral life? And what moral life is being sustained? For us, we of course have the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. We have our community, we have our majalis, we have our centers, we have our activities, we have all kinds of things. We're politically engaged, we're socially engaged, we listen to the Jummah khutbah, we have our alims come, we have visiting alims, mashallah. There's so much going on in our communities, in our faith communities. Right? So while, there's nothing wrong with talking about a little bit of sports, this and that, sure, why, nothing wrong. The Leafs are playing tonight too, right? But I mean, after that 4-0 loss, I mean, I don't know. I mean, you got to really have some issues to just hang on. But anyhow, hope springs eternal, right? So, but this is the Malaise of modernity, but you here are not a part of that, inshallah. You have to remember that you have something much greater. Because I honestly don't, I've lived that life. I've been in that life. Half my family is there, right? Because they're not Muslim. And yes, it's successful and nice people, and I'm not putting anyone down. I'm just saying at the end of the day, if there is no Allah, if there is no God, if there is no religion, if there is no sense of community, what is there that's worth talking about? That's worth investing 120 minutes in? Really? Not even a one mention of Alhamdulillah, God bless. Not even one mention in 2 hours of the name of God, thanks to God, nothing. And this is a sample of the 1%. And I'm not saying that you can't be Muslim and can't have those beliefs and get there. What I'm just simply saying is that if we're Muslims, we have to ask ourselves certain questions, which is, how do we signify God in everything that we do? How do we signify God in everything that we do? That's an important question to ask. Right? Simply signifying God is important. Simply saying Bismillah before we eat, simply saying Salaam Alaikum, simply saying Alhamdulillah, MashaAllah, Subhanallah, Subhanallah. Just using these words itself are important, but consciously using them. Signifying Allah in our life, in our everyday life. So then we have to ask, what is it about my life that signifies God as being a part of it? Oh, there we go, yeah. So what is it about my life that signifies God as being a part of that life? These are important questions to ask. So for some people, all of this can be sorted out with a self-help book. It's all you need. Go to Indigo or Barnes & Nobles or Amazon or whatever, and go buy a self-help book and it'll figure it out. And the problem with this is it equates the path to God as some kind of self-help program, as something that is simple, as something that doesn't require much sacrifice, as something that is, at the end of the day, is, again, very self-centered, because it's about what I want to get out of it. But for the believer, God is our everything. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is our everything. There isn't anything outside of Him. And no self-help book, 10-step, 5-step self-help book written by some cheesy, therapist at Indigo is going to teach you to love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're only going to fool yourself. That's not going to help. There's this beautiful quotation I found today. where the author asks a very provocative question. He says, can we go so far as to mention a return to polytheism? What do you think? Do you think he's saying, have human beings return to being polytheists? It's very interesting. Cardinal Robert Sarah. He says, we live in a pagan system in which gods are born and die depending on our interests. We want nothing to do with the one true God, so we fabricate our own divinities. We create our own gods because we want nothing to do with the God that requires transformation. But the problem with this, as people go from one dog to two dog to becoming a dog themselves, literally, and I'm not even saying that as an insult because people identify as dogs and cats now. Yet suicide, depression, narcotic abuse, antidepressants has never been as high as it has been today. So if this system of self-help, if the system of just living with one's dog, if the system of not getting married and not having a family and not settling down and not having those greater responsibilities to care for other people other than oneself, despite the fact that human growth, domestic product has gone up, but human happiness has plummeted at the same time. So what does all of this tell us? It tells us that all of you are doing something right. That you're all doing, inshallah, something right by holding on to faith, by holding on to Iman. And when people go down this road, they lose the sense of imagination. They lose the sense of hope. They lose the sense of the majesty of creation, of existence. And this is a malaise of modernity. This is a sickness. That the very fact that people have to ask, where does God fit into life? The very fact that the question has to be asked is itself a tragedy. And as Muslims, our mission is completely opposite. So don't think it will be easy, but at the same time, don't think of yourself as minimal. You all have achieved something very great and are achieving something very great. In a world in which human beings have lost God, a world in which the mention of God is not even on 90% of people's lips, at least in the West, let us say, in Europe and North America. Here you are. It should be something you're proud about. Community should be something that you hold on to, that you cherish, that you support. Organizations like Al-Mahdi Youth, Mahdi Youth, MY. I really like this, huh? Well, it's like, you guys are branding. Tomorrow's coming. Wow. Tomorrow's coming. MashaAllah. But this is my point. Because You have something great. And it's okay to feel different. It's okay to be different. It's okay to not fit in with the mold that's out there. It doesn't mean that we disrespect others. It doesn't mean that we put others down. It doesn't mean that we hate others. Absolutely not. But we are sure and firm in what our values are. I had some discussion questions. I wanted to go to them here. Here. I wanted to end off with this. We'll have some questions and then we'll go from there. So I want to have a little discussion here. Last time we spoke about rights of life, right? So today I want us to go to talk about, and then we'll get back to those slides next time. A few things here. So this is how it breaks down. When we hold on to the Quran and the Ahlul Bayt, we now adopt something known as a lifestyle. That lifestyle is coupled with a worldview. A worldview. What do you think are some lifestyle choices that would set you apart as a Muslim from, let's say, people who are not Muslim or people who have no religion at all? Give me an example. What's a lifestyle choice? Right, we hear this word, alternative lifestyle, all the time, right? So what's your alternative lifestyle to their alternative lifestyle then? Use it. Say, oh, I have an alternative lifestyle. So what does that lifestyle look like? If somebody was to ask you, what does your life look like? How would you answer them? Pardon me? Pray 5 times a day. Yeah, prayer. So prayer as a lifestyle, right? Five times, right? Yeah. What else?
Different types of hobbies.
Yeah. So what would be like hobbies that?
I guess like environment, have a different type of environment.
Yeah.
Like we do fun, like instead of like going to like a bar or something, we go to like council on Friday nights.
CIG. Well, I think the whole Muslim coffee shop thing is a big thing now, huh? I think Toronto is quite unique. I'll tell you why. In the States, there's two, well, not even only in the States, I think like Calgary and other places would be like this. There's bars and sports entertainment. That's basically it. Right? So people's hobbies are bars and sports entertainment. But for Muslims, we don't go to bars. Okay, sports is one thing, but it's expensive. Not everyone can afford to go to every Leaf game or Jays game or whatever, right? Fine. But people get together to watch sports, and they generally get together to drink and watch sports. For example, in the UK, this is huge, right? This whole thing of getting together and watching soccer or football. But it's always accompanied with alcohol. But for Muslims, we do come here to CIG. Pardon me? Mocktails. Yeah, the whole mocktail thing. Yeah, that's a thing. Yeah, mocktails. Although, why don't we just call it something else? But anyhow, yeah, mocktails. I think the whole coffee shop thing is a very Muslim thing, to be honest. Especially if it's after like 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Because during the daytime, yeah, Joe and Dave at the construction site want to go and get their double-double, while they're building our roads, right? And after that, they're at the bar. Nobody meets at Timmy's after like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, right? Because they're at a bar, getting drinks, right? Where do people go after work? They go to get drinks, they always say, right? For those who, I mean, some of you are probably pretty young, but once you're in the working corporate world, so, oh, we're going to go get drinks. And so your lifestyle will be opted out. But for Muslims, it's like coffee, right? Coffee, tea. And because we're in such a big city that caters to Muslims, we have like dozens of these places that don't serve alcohol, right? So many different dessert shops and so on and so forth that don't serve alcohol, where Muslims feel at home, where Muslims feel they can come and bring their family and their kids and sit and have a good time. Now, don't think of that just as being dunyawi. That's also an Islamic lifestyle, because you're choosing not to go to a bar where those other people gather and, and do those things where there's inappropriate music and so on and so forth. Not that this can't be inappropriate too, it can be, but it's kind of from that, right? What else would you say would be a lifestyle that fits within our paradigm? What else? Sisters? What's a lifestyle choice? Oh, yeah. That is definitely, yeah, exercise. Yeah. Yeah, because there's shari issues surrounding that, right? Yeah. Dress, especially for sisters, right? I think that's probably the biggest one. That's probably, I'll put that right on the top there with prayer. Just dress. These are like huge lifestyle choices. Dress, prayer, what else?
I guess where you choose to live.
Yeah, definitely. Where we choose to live. That's an amazing one. If you were to ask most people today, and they would ask them, where do you want to live? They would say, oh yeah, Rosedale, Forest Hill, Young and Shepherd, I don't know, just throwing stuff out there, right? Like they think of those neighborhoods, and then they think, oh yeah, they have, good schools, or nice houses, or so on and so forth. And then for us, we generally think that we want to live close to one of our Shia centers, or Muslim centers, or Islamic centers. So if we live in Pickering, we live in Ajax, we live in Richmond Hill. So for example, I work downtown. I work at the University of Toronto. So I live at Don Mills and Finch. So it's not far. It's 15 minutes to the center, about 20 minutes to here. But ideally, my wife and I were speaking, is that, how amazing it would be if we lived, let's say, Yonge and Eglinton, or we lived Bayview and Eglinton, or we lived Bayview and Lawrence, or going further south. Right now my commute's like 20 to 30 minutes maybe. It would cut it in half. Or maybe even somewhere along St. Clair, for example. St. Clair Avenue Road, somewhere along there. But our life is in the mosque. My daughter goes to a Sadiq school, or Islamic school. For other people, none of this factors in. So, but there's a lot of... So I remember I was with someone the other day, and they're like, oh, no, but there's a lot of great schools in that area. And I tried to say, well, no, we go to an Islamic school. Oh, wow, that's a real lifestyle choice. Because now you've got to make all these sacrifices. You got to live in a certain place, right? You can't move further south, although it is more expensive to move further south. But let's say, hypothetically, we could afford to go south of the 401. It would. But now it would take us 45 minutes to get to the masjid. And I would have to take my daughter out of a Sadiq and put her into a probably good public school, because the public schools in some of those, like Bayview and York Mills and stuff, are very good. But that's not a lifestyle choice that my wife and I can make. It's unthinkable, really. At least now, it's unthinkable. Our community of Iman and majalis and lectures and and salat and Jummah and amal nights and camps, and these discussions are too important. But 9.5 out of 10 people that I know, just in general, I'm not talking Muslim, non-Muslim, would not think along those lines. No way. This is what? What do you mean? Because we want to be close to our faith community, to our spiritual communities, to our spiritual homes. This is what makes you different. That's our paradigm. So I want you to think about this more systematically, in a more structured way. As you go on to have families of your own, especially the youngsters, you have to think, if you are Shia and you love Imam al-Mu'mineen, you love the Ahlul Bayt, you follow in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then this is your paradigm. This is how you make decisions. This is how you choose your partner for life. Your partner to have a family with, your husband or your wife. This is how you make those decisions. Because these are matters that shape our worldview. And this is what makes us, our way of life, very antithetical or different or almost unthinkable to maybe some other people. Any other lifestyle choices? We came up with quite a good list here. We got mocktails, this is a good one. Coffee, tea, right? Instead of alcohol. Exercise, so like the location, right, of that, especially for our sisters, right? Very important, right? Place that is closed off for ladies only, where they can preserve their hijab. Very important, of course. And then the way we spend our time, right? So like you're here on a Friday night, right? After we're going to have a discussion. I believe there's some ping pong going on tonight, right? So other people choose to spend their time differently. Dress, prayer is an obvious one. There's another one which I think is really different, are vacations. Or at least how we would sometimes spend March break or Christmas break. How many of you would maybe think of going for ziyarah? Right? Yeah. Ziyarah or Hajj or Umrah or something to that effect. Like these religious tours. And they're very important to us. Or Arba'een. Right? Like half our community is missing during Arba'een. Other people don't live that way. Really, they don't live that way. Like for them, it's just going on a beach, sipping on a cocktail, and getting some sun. And then running around, obviously, without clothes on. Because that's how they don't have any clothes on in those places, right? Obviously, right? It's just sand. They just say sand and sun, right? They call it. Sand and sun and no kapra, no clothes, obviously, right? And then their kids grow up running around with their little things on their arms. All they're seeing is nudity and embracing all of that, those images in their life, and they're raised from when they're young like that. So they get used to having no haya and no shame and nothing. But as Shias, as people who, or Muslims in general, obviously, where we choose to live and where we choose to travel is also a lifestyle choice. And that's all done because we believe Allah created us and gave us this izzat and this dignity, this self-dignity and self-worth. So we make our lifestyle choices or those choices with that belief in mind. How about attitudes towards life? Let's go now to attitudes towards life. So we covered lifestyle. Or maybe we'll do attitudes towards life next time. We've already gone an hour, so I think that's almost an hour. 45 minutes rather, we haven't done an hour, but why isn't this? Which It's not. This one? Oh, did I use a permanent marker? I don't know. I just used what's there. So I don't know. I think maybe it was a permanent marker. But anyhow, any questions?
We can just turn it around.
Oh, yeah? Okay, cool. Let's turn it around. Wow, it's two sides. It's like a souped up version.
I think maybe use this one.
Yeah, I hope that wasn't a permanent marker. I just used what was there. Yeah, I think that was a permanent marker.
Yeah, we'll wipe it off later.
Yeah, I think it'll get wiped off, yeah. So, how about attitudes towards life? Let's discuss that now. Attitudes towards life. How about that? What do you think as a Muslim would make your attitude, what is your attitude towards life as a Muslim, as a follower of Ahlul Bayt? Is there anything that you think would make you different from, let's say, a non-Muslim or a non-believer? Or it's all the same?
I'm not sure if this is a lifestyle choice or an attitude with punctuality.
Punctuality, no, that's good. Punctuality, yeah. I mean, punctuality is a kind of generally just important thing. Although Muslims, or anyways, other parts of the world don't really emphasize on that too much. But punctuality, okay. That's a bit general, but still very, very important akhlaqi attribute, punctuality.
Giving back to the community.
Yes, that's a good one. Giving back towards the attitudes towards life. So giving back to community. Okay. So these are more acts, not so much attitudes. But yes, giving back towards the community is important. And I would say to a certain extent that's shared. Right? People have food banks, they have this. And this is where our values as Muslims align very well with general human values. There isn't a gap, there isn't a difference. Right? So giving back to community is something that is incumbent upon us, is something that's a part of our faith, is something that we have to do. Right? So an attitude in the sense of we could ask, what can we do for others? What can we do for others? That's an attitude. So you approach every situation with how can you be of service? As opposed to how can they serve you? How can you be of service? Yes, sister.
Also, I think, like, for example, if like something doesn't work out in life, you kind of have like trust and hope, so you don't
See,
like go into despair.
that's a good one. See, that's more of an attitude. These are more kind of acts, although this is an attitude too, but hope. Not despair. Let's go a little deeper there, sister. Why hope?
Because you're entrusted in Allah, but ultimately like it's the best thing, like in Allah. It's things that Allah is being written for you as well, like
Trust in Allah, knowing that He has your best interest. That's a big one. Because without that, the universe can deal you a real rough set of cards. It can be tough out there. And this may sometimes seem like a cop-out, but it's not. It's not. Because if you ask yourself a question, how do you deal with the things that are outside of your control? Many things in our life are outside of our control. Many things. Our health very often is outside of our control. Our wealth is outside of our control sometimes. How other people behave around us can be outside of our control. There's many things outside of our control in life. So we're left with two ultimate options now. Option number one, as an attitude, would be, it all means nothing. If I get what I want, I'm good. If I don't get what I want, then life is not worth living. It's not worth living anymore. Because there's no meaning in a life in which I don't get what I want, how I need it, and how I want to feel by it at that moment in time. That life is not worth living anymore, as per that attitude. Because there isn't, in that case, one truth or ultimate entity that is behind the cause, the cause of all causes. Call it, or him, Allah, God, the truth, al-haq, the divine. It's different names given to it. We say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah the great, and glorified be He. That's option number one, which is fatalism. And that's a dangerous and dark road to go down. But it happens very often, very often. Because there's no way to make meaning then of ultimately why do we sometimes have downtimes in life. And the problem with that is that whole concept of being down is also subjective in many ways. Because it all depends on what it means to be up. Without the Sharia, without this akhlaq and these Islamic ethics and these teachings of Ahlul Bayt about the purpose of life and struggle and giving back and living for another life and a hereafter and all of these spiritual, religious, theological themes that are built into the system, that's what keeps us kind of grounded, right? Because otherwise everything is kind of like, well, your up is my down is your up. And we're all living in this world, in this city of Pickering or Ajax or Scarborough, wherever we are, with no standard. So every day the therapist or the psychiatrist or the psychotherapist will meet so many different patients with so many different problems. And some of them might be opposite to each other. Because there isn't a playing field that they're on. You're grasping for one thing, I'm grasping for another. I'm depressed for one reason, you're depressed for another. For example, that's option number one. That's complete fatal. That leads down a road of fatalism. Depression, sadness, meaninglessness. But the second attitude, as the sister just pointed out very well, is trust in Allah. But that's hard. That requires faith. It requires an understanding. It requires two things. One, it requires the belief that there is a creator. He can be proven logically, reasonably, that there is a God. This God exists. This God is necessary to exist. And then the second part is then what is the role of that God in the world? It's a second question that follows up. And of course the deen has answers to all of these things. Over 1,400 years, there's thousands of books and volumes written on this. And mashallah, the answers are Amazing. And really a continuity from the time of the Greeks and the Romans and the Christians and the Jews. Of course, we have our own unique answers from Ahlul Bayt, but a lot of it is a continuity of what all the prophets have brought before. So in scenario number 2, where we trust in God when we don't get what we want, or when we lose what we love, lose a loved one, for example, we trust in God because ultimately we know 2 things. This is very important to keep in mind. We know 2 things. Number 1, we know that the life that we're living is not the only life. And the nature of that life is that it will always be a mixed bag. There's going to be wins and there's going to be losses. Ultimately. What matters is us in understanding that none of this determines our eventual outcome. How we respond to it determines that. By realizing that everything perishes except for Him, except for God. So ultimately, He's the only one that we can rely on. So either, God forbid, He's an evil God, na'udhu billah, who relishes at seeing our suffering, or there has to be a deeper divine purpose behind it. That makes sense. 99.9% of philosophers of religion have chosen that. It makes sense logically from so many different perspectives. And number 2, every challenge that we experience in this world is meant to purify us in one way or another for the next world. That's the philosophy of it. That's what the Ahlul Bayt have told us. That's what the prophets of God have told us. So then you get that trust from that reservoir of Iman and understanding. But that requires you to be in a community that can sustain that faith. You often can't do it on your own. You need friends and brothers and sisters and parents and wives and children that can reinforce that. And that's why attitude towards life are not on our own, right? They have to be, it's a social thing. Any other attitudes? And then it's going to be salah time, so we'll break for salah time. Anything else? Yes, sister. Intent. Very good, yes. Intentionality, yeah. That's a good one. Intentionality. We do everything. What is our niyyah in everything we do? Qurbatan illallah. To get closer to Allah. Everything has a niyyat in Islam. Everything, before we eat, before we sleep, before we start work that day, everything has a niyyah. وَإِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, as the Prophet says, and actions are associated with their intentions. Every action has an intention. And that makes our life and our attitude very purposeful. Everything becomes directed to God. That's why beginning everything with Bismillah is so important. Everything. Beginning everything with Bismillah is very important because it's a verbalization of our intent. All right? So we'll end there, inshallah. وآخر دعوانا والحمد لله رب العالمين